Church, lay people or priests, there are several issues that come up every time. Has the growing number of homosexuals in the priesthood contributed to this? It is an argument made by those in the church, including the Pope's spokesman, who think the priesthood is not a good calling for gay men. There are others who believe that the obligation of celibacy is a factor. And two, what about the leadership from Rome, from the Pope himself? Here's ABC's Bill Blakemore.
For nearly 2,000 years, the Vatican in Rome has struggled to hold a worldwide church together with strict rules and traditions, and that may be part of the problem. The cardinals have taken special vows to protect the church from scandal, to keep weakness hidden. For centuries, the only place anyone would talk honestly about sex of any kind was the confessional, where it was only between you, God, and the priest. But some of this is changing.
In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit.
Struggling in the face of this crisis, some seminary directors are getting the message. Things older priests were embarrassed to talk about when they were in seminary must now be taught openly. And they must carefully screen their candidates, those future priests who will run typical neighborhood churches, or like these Franciscan seminarians who will specialize in helping inner city youth.
What screening process did you all go through before getting into the seminary?
It very much is the same kind of psychological exams anybody would go through for many different things. We go through the MMPI, we go through the Rorschach.
They don't just look at you when you first join, but all the way through. It's a very developed program.
We have courses in psychology and counseling, courses in sexuality. By being priests, we're not asexual. We still are sexual beings, and how to express that properly.
Just bringing in lecturers or having conversations about sexual things is not enough. You have to be able to talk with the individual seminarian about his life, about his feelings, about his impulses, about his fantasies, about his history, and then the ability to live as celibates out in a very erotic culture like ours.
In this very erotic culture, part of this crisis that is often argued about only privately in the church is how much of the problem is due to homosexuality. Conservative church leaders say a lot. They point out that the vast majority of abuse cases that have come to light in this crisis are about homosexual abuse of teenage boys. The hard question, which few will tackle in public, is there a connection? Many church liberals say, no way.
The church has always said, and will always say, homosexuality is not something that a person should be regarded as evil because of, or in some way unworthy of ordination. What the church says is a man to be ordained has to be capable of controlling his sexual life, whether it's heterosexual or homosexual. That's the church's teaching.
I believe that the idea that this is a problem caused by homosexuals is an effort to find some way to get rid of this problem by scapegoating it on to a group of people who are vulnerable in the way people look at them in society.
But there seems to be confusion about what the church teaching is. The Vatican apparently thinks the problem is about homosexuality. Papal spokesman Joaquin Navarro-Valls, answering questions about this crisis, is quoted in the New York Times saying, "People with these inclinations just cannot be ordained. That does not imply a final judgment on people with homosexuality, but you cannot be in this field." This echoes what some conservative American church leaders are saying privately. To keep and protect the all-male celibate priesthood, they must make it clear to all men thinking of becoming priests that homosexuals need not apply. While liberal Catholics say this crisis is not the fault of homosexuals, they say it is about the all-male celibate priesthood, and that it should change. There should be married priests and women priests. But they complain the Vatican and conservative American hierarchy are afraid of change.
I think it's fear of scandal, fear of shocking, fear of disillusioning people. The church has had a wonderful image, and it's been preserved at times by covering up some very human and sometimes some very pathological and very criminal behavior.
The hierarchical model, which John Paul II, great man though he may be, has tried to impose on the church, has caused the church to make the same error, try to control this crisis around pedophilia and sexual abuse by controlling it from the top and at the top. That does not work.
It is true that last year, with sex abuse scandals coming to light in several countries, the Vatican issued new orders to bishops about how to handle allegations of sex abuse by priests. But in spite of a growing outcry from American Catholics for the church hierarchy to be more open, little is known about these new directives from Rome. The Vatican is keeping them secret.
Several times the Pope has condemned men who abuse young people, but we do not know how deeply involved or fully informed the Pope is about what is happening here. The United States accounts for about 6% of all the Catholics in the world. Here again are our Catholic voices on this question of leadership.
Some of the men who have been appointed to high posts in the church, including some of the bishops, have been appointed because they toe the line without much challenging or open conversation about issues.
Is the American Roman Catholic Church able to make changes if the Roman Catholic Church in Rome, i.e. in the Vatican, wishes not to make changes?
No, no. You move together. Being a bishop now means you're the branch manager for the Vatican, rather than the leader of the local church.
Part of the reason for this crisis is that the National Conference of Catholic Bishops in the United States does not have the authority to formulate policy that is binding on all the bishops in this country, and the Vatican has been very wary of giving the National Conference any real authority out of fear that it somehow threatens the Vatican's authority.
How hard will it be for the church to change?
It's going to be very difficult for the church to change because they've got to fess up. They've got to understand that their entire bureaucratic structure has led to a kind of sclerosis in the Catholic Church.
There is a need to regain a credibility. It's like saying we need a new mission. We need a new reason for being. I mean, when you say that, you're saying you got...
The United States accounts for about 6% of all the Catholics in the world. Here again are our Catholic voices on this question of leadership.
Some of the men who have been appointed to high posts in the church, including some of the bishops, have been appointed because they toe the line without much challenging or open conversation about issues.
Is the American Roman Catholic Church able to make changes if the Roman Catholic Church in Rome, i.e. in the Vatican, wishes not to make changes?
No, no. You move together. Being a bishop now means you're the branch manager for the Vatican, rather than the leader of the local church.
Part of the reason for this crisis is that the National Conference of Catholic Bishops in the United States does not have the authority to formulate policy that is binding on all the bishops in this country, and the Vatican has been very wary of giving the National Conference any real authority out of fear that it somehow threatens the Vatican's authority.
How hard will it be for the church to change?
It's going to be very difficult for the church to change because they've got to fess up. They've got to understand that their entire bureaucratic structure has led to a kind of sclerosis in the Catholic Church.
There is a need to regain a credibility. It's like saying we need a new mission. We need a new reason for being. I mean, when you say that, you're saying you got a serious problem.
Is it a turning point for the American Catholic Church?
I think that once the Catholic Church faces up to this crisis, it hasn't yet, but once it faces up to this crisis, then I think it's going to be a better church in the long run.
We're seeing people rising up and saying, no, this is our church. We can't let this continue. There is something about a crisis that brings people together. Something within you just wells up out of your heart and says, no. No, enough is enough.
Look, the church doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to recognize sin, its own, that's all.
What do you think will change?
Well, I think that what will change is this. The next time a priest puts his hands on a kid and a bishop plays musical chairs with him, that bishop will fall.
You mean if a bishop moves them around from parish to parish?
That's right, from parish to parish.
This is going to leave a legacy among American Catholics who will require greater levels of accountability that the bishops and the priests in this country cannot ignore.
Is it realistic to think that fundamental change in the Roman Catholic Church can take place?
Of course. Our tradition is incredibly strong. It's been around for 2,000 years precisely because it's been able to adapt and to change.
This is my church too. I'm staying. I'm thinking. I'm contributing. I'm listening. Bottom line, here's my bottom line. There's something living, breathing in this tradition. So the church, after this scandal, is going to be different. It's going to be different.
A disgraced priest confesses, speaking out about the crimes and seeking forgiveness when the Catholic Church in crisis continues.
Caught are understandably silent. And so to hear from a man who was caught, paid a price, and now seeks some form of redemption is unusual. Neil Conway tonight in conversation with Chris Wallace.
When I was dressed up in that collar and I was doing my work, that was Father Neil Conway. When I was doing this kind of stuff, I was in another set of clothes, I was another person living another life, and the twain didn't meet.
It started so differently. Neil Conway grew up the 12th of 13 children in a well-to-do Irish Catholic family. He decided he'd make his mark becoming a priest. But it's more complicated than that. Conway says he was sexually abused as a child.
It gave me all the more reason just to get sex out of my life. Get it out of my life. I decided at 14 to be a priest. One thing you don't do as a priest, you don't have sex. And also, I really regret this, you don't have romance in your life. You don't have intimacy, you know?
Did you feel that taking the vow of celibacy, in a sense, would be a safe haven, would be a place where you wouldn't have to deal with sex?
Right, very good. That's what I'd call a safe haven, a safe haven.
In 1963, when Conway became a priest in Cleveland at age 27, he says he was good at it. He helped the poor. He also started working with young teens. One Sunday, he was wrestling with a 14-year-old.
And all of a sudden, I felt this sexual feeling, excitement, you know, and it scared me.
Conway says he was able to suppress his feelings for 2 years, until he took another boy on a ski trip and ended up sharing a bed with him.
I woke up in the night fondling him. That was my first abuse. I didn't do a lot of these one-night stands. These were relationships. Sick as they were relationships. I felt they were relationships, okay?
And how many young men were there?
8. I hate to say it, but I think it's true that the faces changed, but the game was always the same.
And the game was?
The game was trying to find intimacy, love, and romance and sex from a young man.
After years of therapy and reflection, Conway thinks he understands why it happened. One reason, he says, is that starting out on the priest track at age 14, he never had to sort out all the emotions and urges of growing up.
I ran out of my capacity to repress my sexuality, you know, and it busted out. My sexuality busted out. And I busted out like a little 14-year-old boy with other little 14-year-old boys.
You mean you were with other kids because you were still a kid
that's
yourself?
What I'm saying. I had to start at 14 because that's where I stopped. I think that's my greatest regret, you know, that for some reason I couldn't have what I needed in life, and I went after the vulnerable to go get it.
That's what Conway thinks now. But back when he was in the middle of it, this priest who wanted to do good says he felt almost no guilt about doing bad.
I remember thinking, oh yeah, this is part of our relationship, it's part of our friendship. That's insane. But I was, you know, that's what I was saying.
So somehow you convinced yourself you weren't hurting these kids, you were helping them? Father Conway, you're a smart man.
I'm a smart man. An addict is insane.
Conway's double life came crashing down in 1985 when a nun found a teenager in his bed at the rectory. he was reported to the Catholic Diocese of Cleveland.
I was informed that they really didn't have any hard evidence. And I said, don't wait for hard evidence. I need to go now. I need treatment now.
Conway was sent for treatment to St. Luke's Institute in Maryland. After a year, he says the church was willing to let him return to the priesthood, where there would be no contact with children. But he decided he should retire.
I just felt that my kind of guy shouldn't be a priest. That's what I felt.
Shouldn't be in the church.
Yeah, even if he never did it again. I got to find another way to serve God and serve myself and serve others, you see?
For the last 16 years, Conway has lived alone on a small farm near Cleveland. On Easter morning, he was planting flowers before a statue of St. John the Evangelist. He has created this personal prison so he can face the truth of exactly what he did. Now, in the church crisis, Conway says he's found a way to serve. He's speaking out, and he hopes other sex offender priests will also, to force the church to deal with its problems.
The wound has to be at least treated at its sorest point. The sore point now is priests who abuse teens, and a church that tends to not help solve the problem so much as protect itself.
Conway says he set a rule for himself, never again to be alone with teenagers. But for all his efforts, he says he realizes that he still takes his place alongside other priests who have brought so much hurt.
You got a lot of psychological reasons why you did what you did.
Yeah, that's right.
The fact is...
I did it. It was my hands.
Right.
Right? Yeah.
You committed a crime. You committed a sin.
Yeah, that's right. I live under the gospel of someone who, Jesus said, would have been better if he had not been born. That's what's been killing me for the last 16 years.
One other note, we are told that within the last decade, seminaries in the United States have stopped recruiting potential priests right out of junior high school. This is a huge subject, this turmoil in the church. We ourselves are left wondering what will change. What effect will ordinary Roman Catholics have on the future direction of their church? Will, for example, lay people withhold their Sunday contribution to the collection plate until they are satisfied that things are changing? We were reminded this week that change in this church does not always start at the top. We also know there are many agendas in this ancient church, and change is not easy. But that's our broadcast. There's a good deal of information about all of this at abcnews.com and at beliefnet.com. Thank you for joining us. I'm Peter Jennings. Good night.